Good evening. I'm Steve Weberg. I'm with the Public Affairs staff of the Kansas City Public Library, and I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to be speaking to you from the Truman Forum Auditorium in the library's Plaza branch. Normally, one of our two primary venues for our evening speaking events. It's not so great that by and large, as we continue to look out for the health and welfare and safety of our patrons and staff and our presenters, that we're coming mostly virtually. We have with us here a very small and well-spaced number of invited guests from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, and hope that we'll be filling our auditoriums again very soon. We're launching a new series tonight, Hollywood versus History, in collaboration with the Command and General Staff College. It's one of our longest, closest, and most popular programming partners. We'll spotlight a succession of military movies, starting with The Man Who Would Be King, the 1975 swashbuckler starring Sean Connery and Michael Caine, and examine the historical accuracy of these movies. In tonight's case, that means looking at how the film, directed by John Huston, portrays the life of Afghanistan in the late 19th century and how it presents British colonialism in that era, among other things. Among other films that we'll look at over the course of the series are Dr. Strangelove, Glory, which tells the story of the first all-black Civil War regiment raised in the North, and Kingdom of Heaven, which is set during the Crusades. We think it'll be terrific. In fact, we know it'll be terrific, and we think tonight and know that tonight will be terrific as well. We're thrilled to be able to lean on the deep and knowledgeable roster of military historians at the Army Command and General Staff College. On behalf of the library, I want to extend our gratitude to the late Jerry Rosenblum, in whose memory we're presenting tonight's program and this series. Mr. Rosenblum was a longtime friend to the library and a committed attendee of our signature events and public programs. He very generously included the library in his estate plan, making, among other things, this Hollywood versus History series possible. I know a number of Jerry's family are with us virtually tonight, including his sister Arlene Rosenblum Shalinsky, his nieces and nephews Howard and Sarah Shalinsky, Lauren and Robin Shalinsky, and Marla and Gideon Stein. They sent a lovely message, and if you don't mind, I'd like to read just a part of it. It really tells us something about Jerry. They say, "We are delighted that the library found such a suitable series to honor Jerry, who passed away just over a year ago at age 89. Jerry loved the library's programs and was particularly interested in history and also the Army specifically. Jerry himself served in the Army during the Korean conflict. He mostly served at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and remembered his Army days as a very important and formative period in his life. Of course, he enjoyed the friends he made, as well as seeing various parts of the country, but mostly he was honored to serve his country, and the sense of duty and responsibility and loyalty he honed in that time remained a roadmap throughout his life." They go on, "Indeed, Jerry continued to serve in so many capacities to help make the world a better place. In addition to his professional work as an analyst at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, he was a lifelong, dedicated volunteer, filling out tax returns for older adults through AARP, at the local Hadassah thrift shop, where he used his amazing skill at fixing almost anything. And of particular note, he served as the volunteer treasurer of the Federal Employees Credit Union, now known as the Mazuma Credit Union, for 50 years. And this was his labor of love. His meticulous attention to detail and his forward thinking helped transform this small credit union into the major institution that it is today. And they conclude, we're delighted that Jerry chose to make a gift to the library to enable this series as it was important to him. It's a tribute to the library and the quality programming, attention to detail, and welcoming atmosphere that it's offered throughout the years. Thank you all to Jerry's family so much, and know how thankful we are for your and his generosity. Now, we're thankful tonight, too, to have Brian Steed with us from the Command and General Staff College to dive into The Man Who Would Be King. This is, I think, the 7th time that Brian has spoken at the library. He's a favorite among the favorites. He's a nationally renowned expert on Middle Eastern history, a retired Army lieutenant who served in the Middle East served as a Middle East foreign area officer, and he lived and worked there for 8 years. His discussion tonight is timely, of course, amid the recent events in Afghanistan. For those of you who are with us virtually, if you have a question for Brian over the course of the discussion, you can submit it via the YouTube chat box, the live chat box, and any of you here in the auditorium with a question, we have a table there, and you can write it on a note card, and I'll get it, and we'll get as many of those questions, both the virtual questions and the questions presented here, answered as we can at the end of the presentation. Brian, I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. It's great to have you here at the library again.
Okay, well, thank you, Steve, and I want to thank the library. It has been like more than an entire COVID pandemic since the last time I've been able to speak here, so it's a real pleasure to be able to come back, even to a very small audience. Okay, at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, I often have done a war movie set with my students where we'll watch war movies and we'll kind of, for those of you familiar with the Mystery Science Theater 3000, we'll sort of make comments, I'll pause it, talk about it. I'm going to do a little bit of that tonight. This movie is one that we talk about almost every year, and I recommend it to the students. So what I'm going to talk about tonight is I'm going to talk a little bit about the film, I'm going to talk about the history, and then I'm going to talk about why I think this is a movie that every Army officer ought to watch, and then I think also everybody ought to watch, because it's an educational movie, or can be, as well as a, I think, enjoyable and entertaining film. So let's dive right into 1975's The Man Who Would Be King. Obviously, as Steve indicated, the two main stars are Sean Connery and Michael Caine, and they do a spectacular job of representing the two main characters, Daniel Dravit and Peachy Carnahan. And as we look at those characters, let's make sure I can advance. Okay, there we go. Well, I'll talk a little bit about the details of the film before I jump into the characters. So this was released at the end of 1975, so in December 1975, which gets some interesting dynamics when we look at how much money the movie earned, because you'll see different box office figures. I think it's because of the different reporting years. Nowadays, when they report box office numbers, they tend to be for the life of the film. I'm thinking they did it by year, but whether they did or not, it was pretty well received at the time it was released. It is based off of an 1888 novella, so it's longer than a short story, but shorter than an actual book, by Rudyard Kipling. And so if you're familiar with Rudyard Kipling, he is, I think, the author of Victorian England, and especially the British Empire at large, and particularly British India. So there's a whole lot of books, obviously, the Jungle Book being one of his most famous, that we come from. He also will introduce us to the term, the Great Game, and he does that through his novel called Kim, which we're not going to talk about right now, but the Great Game plays a little bit into this film. So I want to kind of give my three big reasons why I recommend this film and I think you ought to watch it. Number one, it is a great buddy movie. It's one of the best buddy movies that's ever made. It's not a buddy cop movie because they're not cops. They're actually kind of the opposite of cops. But it's a great buddy movie all by itself. Second, it is a great movie talking about that era of the Great Game and the struggles of Great Britain and dealing with areas like Afghanistan. And I'll talk about that more as I go on. And I think it's one of the greatest films on cross-cultural influence that you can watch, which I'll also highlight as I go. So I'll keep going. So let's start with some interesting facts about the film itself. So one, this was a passion project by John Huston. He wanted to make this shortly after World War II ended. And he planned on doing it all throughout the 50s and the 60s. He was looking at guys like Clark Gable and Humphrey Bogart. So after John Huston did The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, that's really when he wanted to get Humphrey Bogart in the film. But he was never able to pull it off. So it wasn't until the mid-70s that he finally is able to put the film together. The second, in the upper right, the image that you see of that lady, this is a woman who in the film is going to be the bride of Sean Connery's character, is actually Michael Caine's wife, because that actress, or that part, John Huston was not able to cast before the filming began. And so in the middle of filming, they opt to cast Michael Caine's wife in the role. I think that's an interesting one. The other one, another note is this is filmed in Morocco, as a whole lot of Middle Eastern films tend to be, even to the present day. So a lot of times when it's set in Jordan or it's set anywhere else in the Middle East, it's quite often set in Morocco, because Morocco seems to have a good relationship with Hollywood. So if you're listening to it and you are a Dari or Pashto or Urdu speaker, what you will hear them speaking is not any of those languages. What you will hear them speaking is actually Moroccan Arabic, which is kind of humorous. And we'll get a couple scenes where you'll be able to pick up some of those words. Now in the middle picture here, you have this old man crowning Sean Connery. He's another fascinating cat. So this guy was actually the night watchman of the local olive orchard or olive grove next to where they were filming. And John Huston just loved his look, and he cast him as the role of the high priest of the religious seat or city called Sikandar. And so he gets cast in this, and he would show up to work every day on the set being very, very tired. And everybody was wondering why he was so tired. And it was because he was still going back to be the night watchman of the olive grove every night, until they finally explained to him that they were paying him to do the film enough that he didn't have to go to the olive grove every night. And oh, by the way, he was reportedly 103 years old as he was doing that. And when he watched the movie, he said, "Now I will live forever." Anyways, I think it's just a heartwarming story. Anyway, and the final part that I think is note, the bottom picture here is, and this is a spoiler anyway, but near the end of the film, Sean Connery's character will fall from this bridge. When they did the filming of it, well, it's interesting, Sean Connery actually is scared of heights, so he had issues about standing on the bridge at all, which is kind of a funny note. But the stuntman that they had doing it actually fell more than 80 feet onto the cardboard cushion that they had built below. It's kind of a fascinating technical piece all by itself. So that's some interesting facts about this film. So here's a summary of the film. It starts in 1885. That's when the movie is set. And you're introduced to the main characters, which are two former British sergeants who are now civilians in British India. And they are Daniel Dravett, or Danny Dravett, as he's referred to, and Peachy Carnahan. And they're seeking to make their fortune through a whole bunch of nefarious means, but ultimately the big idea is to go to Kafiristan and to basically rob the place blind. We'll present their plan here in a bit as a film clip, because I think they say it better than I will. They will make a contract with Rudyard Kipling. So Rudyard Kipling, the author of the novella, is actually a character in the movie. And then Dravitt and Carnahan go to Kafiristan, and they actually fulfill their dream. But then things go sideways. I'm not going to talk so much about how they go sideways. I'll let you watch that yourselves to get to see. But that's kind of how it's going. And I want to go back really quick to the slide. So let me see if I can get it. Okay. So I have listed here 5 main actresses or actors, and Shakira Caine as an actress. There are 4 main characters. I'm going to list them. Well, you have Sean Connery, who's playing Daniel Dravitt. You have Michael Caine, who's playing Peachy Carnahan. You have Christopher Plummer, who's playing Rudyard Kipling. And then you have Saeed Jaffrey, who's playing Billyfish. And I will argue that Billyfish is the most important character in the film. He doesn't have the biggest role, but in terms of lessons learned, he is the most important character. Now, how do we meet Dravitt and Carnahan? Well, first, we meet him when Peachy Carnahan picks Rudyard Kipling's pocket, and he takes his pocket watch. And on that pocket watch, he sees a Masonic symbol. And so, and Masonry is a theme throughout the film, this sort of concept of a universal brotherhood. And so Peachy and Danny and Rudyard Kipling are all Masonic brothers. And so when Peachy realizes that he's picked the pocket of a Masonic brother, he knows he has to return it. So he tries to find him. It's in the train station. And so he's going looking for Rudyard Kipling. He finds him on the train. He gets on the train with him. And then Peachy returns the watch to Rudyard Kipling by throwing this man in the center picture off the train and accusing him of being the thief who picked Rudyard Kipling's pocket. And then Peachy returns the watch to Kipling. Now, Kipling actually knows that the watch was picked from his pocket before, and he reveals that a little bit later. But still, we're starting to understand something about these characters. And then Kipling will do a favor of Peachy Carnahan, and he'll inform Danny Dravitt, give him a message from Carnahan. And what Dravitt will express is that they are going to blackmail a local ruler by threatening to reveal what he did to his mother-in-law. Okay. And we'll see the results of what happens with that blackmail in a scene in just a moment. But the point that I think is important here is these are not good guys, okay? They're the protagonists of the film, but they're not morally or ethically good people. They are sketchy, okay? They have a very pragmatic, self-interested ethic. They have hubristic ignorance, as we will see with the clips that I'll show you. But I would argue that their self-confidence is endearing. Like, these are rogues. They're scoundrels, but they're kind of endearing scoundrels. And they have this respect for each other and for their Masonic brothers, which is this sense of duty that exists throughout the film. All the way from beginning to end, we see their loyalty and what that loyalty consists of. Okay. So they're going to talk about the Izzat-ul-Raj, and they're going to talk about the Anglo-Afghan War. So I want to introduce that really quickly. So British India, when you look at that picture in the upper right, British India is a massive area. In today's standards, the countries we would call British India would include modern-day Pakistan, modern-day India, modern-day Bangladesh, modern-day Myanmar, and parts of Thailand. Okay, it is massive in terms of both population and area. Most of Kipling lived, mostly when he lived in India, up in Lahore. He was actually born in Delhi, but his professional life, when he was in India, he spent in Lahore and up in today what we would call Pakistan. But that was also British India at the time. British India was ruled by the East India Company for about 100 years, from about 1757 to 1858. There was a massive revolt in India in 1857, and that causes the British government to realize it needs to step in. Now, the East India Company acted as a non-state actor on behalf of the British government. So it wasn't part of the British government officially, but it did the bidding of the British government. And so in 1858, when the British government officially takes over, then the East India Company goes away as an entity, although a lot of East India players will continue on in the government functions. Now, why does this matter? One, this period that lasts about-ish 100 years, about 90 years, is also why we refer to it as the British Empire, because Queen Victoria was Queen of England, but she was the Empress of India. So this is where they get the title, and India was regularly referred to as the jewel in the British crown, as the single most important economic asset for the British Empire. Now, the British Empire wanted to protect India from Russian expansion, and the competition between the British Empire and the Russian Empire is what we call the Great Game. Russia was expanding both east and then south, and heading toward India. And the British wanted to prevent Russia from taking over India, and Russia did on several occasions want to take over India. And so the British came up with this idea of protecting India by something they called forward presence or forward engagement. So they would go beyond the borders of British India to protect India. And that beyond the borders area often included what we today call Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan, as existed during the period of the East India Company or during the Raj, was never quite how we see it drawn on the map. And even today, Afghanistan isn't the way we see it drawn on the map in the sense of how it's governed and who can govern everything in it. So it was regularly governed by different individuals. Sometimes those individuals would be opposed to British rule in India or opposed to British policies or interests, and sometimes they would be in favor of them. And times they would be in favor of Russian interests or want Russian support because the Russians would be happy to pay individuals in Afghanistan to make problems for the British. So often the Russians would get involved in Afghanistan, and when I say involved, relatively loosely involved. They'd pay people, they would send arms and so forth. And the British would respond, and there are three different Anglo-Afghan wars. The first one is 1839 to 1842, and we see this picture in the middle, which is this famous painting done in 1879 during the Second Anglo-Afghan War. But it's depicting this retreat from Kabul by the British citizens. I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I think it's more than 10,000. It might be as many as 16,000 British soldiers and civilians who flee Kabul heading for Jalalabad through the Khyber Pass. And most of them will be killed. In fact, almost all of them. And this shows William Bryden, who's the surgeon, a British officer, but a medical officer, who is believed to be, when he arrives at the fortress in Jalalabad, the only survivor of that more than 10,000 person party. And this painting is a rather famous one called The Remnants of an Army. That first Anglo-Afghan war is all about replacing leadership. The British want to put in somebody favorable to them. The British end up leaving, having this horrible catastrophe, and it ends up very poorly for the British. The British will go back in about-ish 30 years later, and they will have more success. And this is the second Anglo-Afghan war. This is the one that Danny and Peachy will refer to in a later scene. And then the final image on here is to show British India as it existed at the time of that this film is supposed to take place. And it's a patchwork. It's not just governed by the British, but it's also governed by local leaders. Okay, so here's our introduction to Danny and Peachy. And this is after they've been picked up for this blackmail scheme that fails. And they're reporting to the local government.
Hats off!
You men are not under arrest. Thanks to Mr. Kipling here, who happens to be a genuine correspondent for the Northern Star.
But both of you richly deserve to be in jail.
I have your records before me.
There's everything in them, from smuggling to swindling to receiving stolen goods to barefaced blackmail.
Sir, I resent the accusation of blackmail. It is blackmail to obtain money by threats of publishing information in a newspaper. But what blackmail is there in accepting a small retainer for keeping it out of a newspaper?
And how did... It would have been wiser if you'd...
Okay, so the idea was, once again, I talked about the blackmail before. Here you get this sense of these guys, once again, not good cats. They're trying to use their position. They're trying to gain every advantage possible. But they do have this sort of ethic that they're expressing. Oops, I got to go back and fix it again. Okay. Run it from here.
Sir, I resent the accusation of blackmail. It is blackmail to obtain money by threats of publishing information in a newspaper. But what blackmail is there in accepting a small retainer for keeping it out of a newspaper?
And how did... It would have been wiser if you'd both gone home at the end of your army service.
Home to what? A porter's uniform outside a restaurant? And tanner tips from belching civilians for closing cab doors on them and their blousy women?
Not for us, thank you. Not after watching Afghans come howling down out of the hills and taking battlefield command when all the officers had copped it.
Well said, Brother Dravett.
No criminal...
Okay, so this idea, and this is an important thing to recognize. Kipling captures this a lot in his writing, but so do other people of this era. These guys are lower class within the British system. They have nothing to return to. As British sergeants and British soldiers, they were basically nothing within the British social structure. So for them to go home, they would just end up going back home to that. But here, these guys had realized that they had opportunities that go beyond just being a porter outside of a hotel or helping people onto cabs, that these guys actually could take charge of things as they had done during the war.
Or charges against you. But I'll see these files reach Calcutta with the recommendation that you be deported as political undesirables. Detriments to the dignity of the empire and the izzat of the Raj.
Detriments, you call us? Detriments? Well, I want to remind you it was detriments like us that built this bloody empire and the izzat of the bloody Raj. That's all. About turn.
Okay, so I love that aspect that they're defending their position and who they are and their abilities and their what they believe their status should be, that they're the ones who actually did the work. Okay, so let's talk about, they're going to talk about Kafiristan here in a minute. And Kafiristan is actually a place at this time, which is sort of surprising. So Hollywood gets this kind of accurate. And so anytime you hear Stan, it means land of. So Kafiristan is land of the Kafirs, meaning the unbelievers, those who are not properly Muslim. And they weren't. The people who lived in Kafiristan actually sort of were Hindus. They're going to talk about them as idol worshippers, which by a Muslim standard or by a Christian standard is a bit true. But it's sort of Hindu, but it wasn't totally Hindu. So what they practiced in Kafiristan actually have a technical name to it, but it's a syncretic form of Hinduism. Now what syncretism means is it's kind of like snowball, right? Like you have something that's the core of the religion, and then it gathers up other bits of other things. So there are several syncretic religions throughout the Middle East and Central Asia. This religion that was practiced in Kafiristan is one of those. In 1895, 1896, Kafiristan will be conquered, and the people in there will be converted to Islam. And at that point, it takes on the name Nuristan. So if you look at a map of Afghanistan today, it will have a province called Nuristan. And what Nuristan means, it means land of light or land of the enlightened. So the people who saw the light, converted to Islam, that kind of thing. Well, they're going to talk about the last European who was there, and they're actually wrong. And anyway, we'll get into that in just a minute. Okay. Wait. Oh, I got what we did. We missed the rest. Okay, so let me go back to this, and we're going to see where they introduce themselves to Kipling more directly. So after this run-in with this government official, they now go to Kipling's office. They don't tell you where, but I'm saying in Lahore, and this is the conversation they have.
Let me introduce you to Brother Peachy Carnahan, which is him. and brother Daniel Dravert, which is I. The less said about our professions, the better, but we have been most things in our time. We've been all over India. We know her cities, her jungles, her jails, and her palaces. And we have decided that she isn't big enough for such as we.
Therefore, we are going away to another place, where a man isn't crowded and can come into his own. We're not little men, so we're going away to be kings. Kings of Kafiristan.
Oh, Kafiristan. We hear they have 32 idols there, so we'll be the 33rd and 34th.
Okay, this idea that we are not little men. You could probably, if you were boiling down the sequence of this, or the theme of this movie in one aspect, from the Dravert and Carnahan perspective, it is that line. We are not little men, and they do not think they are.
It's a place of warring tribes, which is to say, a land of opportunity for such as we, who know how to train men and lead them into battle.
We'll go there. We'll say to any chief we can find, do you want to vanquish your foes? Of course he'll say, go to it. We'll fight for him, make him king, then we'll subvert that king. We'll seize his royal throne and loot the country 4 ways from Sunday.
How's that for a plan?
Okay, so this is their plan, is that they're going to do, like, this is, once again, not good guys. And I don't think it's, like, they're talking about robbing everything from the people in Kafiristan.
A party of geographers, a mapping expedition tried several years ago and vanished into thin air. No white man has ever been there and come out since Alexander.
Alexander who?
Alexander the Great, king of Greece, about 300 years before Christ.
Well, if a Greek can do it, we can do it.
I love that line. Okay, so like they're putting themselves on that line. Now it's fascinating if you look at this map of where Alexander, they think his route was as it went through Afghanistan. Probably not through Kafiristan, so that's probably not historically accurate. But anyway, still makes a great story. Okay, so they get to Kafiristan, and they talk about the journey through the Hindu Kush and the high mountains and all the difficulties, and then they arrive there, and what happens is, and they're transporting guns with them, and they arrive there, they change out of their outfits, they get into the outfits, you're going to see them here in a moment, and then they see a group of villagers that are washing their clothes and bathing in a local river. And then they see this group that have these masks on attacking them. And Danny and Peachy defend them with their firearms. And then as they come down, they think all these guys are dead, these masked guys, but this guy's actually alive, and they decide they're going to take him to the local village.
Up's a daisy, lad.
Okay, so these guys have a Westerner's perspective of what they're seeing. So they hear this music playing, and they're thinking it's in celebration of what they accomplished.
Black band and all, hail the conquering hero.
But they are wrong.
Bloody cheek. Where's their gratitude?
I say there. Are you in?
Okay, here's where we get introduced to the most important character in the film. And the actor, Saeed Jaffrey, does a brilliant job in this role.
This man, please.
Stone the bleeding crows. Yes, mate. And who might you be?
So what I want you to notice is how Billyfish apes British behavior. It's sort of like he has British culture, but it's just as like a costume.
Rifleman Machendra Bahadur Gurung, known to my regiment as Billyfish.
Is that right? Well, report, Rifleman. What are you doing here? Wherever here is.
Oh, I come with Colonel Robinson.
The geographer's party?
Oh, dear me, alas, by Jove. Party not reaching Arhab for very misfortunate reasons. Large mountain is falling on the heads of Colonel Robertson and others. Everybody buried alive, except your servant.
What about them up there, banging drums and blowing horns, and then shooting arrows at us?
Oh, big noise intended to scare away devils. Many devils here these days, you know.
They thought we was devils?
Oh, Kafiristan.
Okay, this is part of the great irony in John Huston's filmmaking. It's Sean Connery who asks that line. They believe we are devils. Later in this film, Sean Connery is going to act as if he's a god. So it's really kind of an ironic foreshadowing in the film.
Pakistan people's very ignorant. I say to headman Uta, I say, oh no, by Jove, they're not devils. They're Gorashabs, British soldiers.
Good man, Billyfish.
And now, if you'll take us to this Utah bloke, we will begin his education.
Okay, so they take him up to Utah, and you get this introduction with Billyfish as the mediator between everything.
Tell him we won't hurt him, not to worry.
La takhaf, daromat, niche aaja. He wants to know where you come from.
Tell him we tumbled from the skies.
Min nazlu asman.
Avatar, Divta.
He wants to know, are you gods?
Not gods, Englishmen, which is the next best thing.
La avatar, la devta, Gorashab.
Okay, so I hope everybody's appreciating the irony here, right?
I oft-times tell Uta about Englishmen, how they give names to dogs and take off hats to women and march into battle left, right, with rifles on their shoulders.
Bringing enlightenment to the darker regions of the earth.
Okay, so one, Rudyard Kipling is unapologetically British imperial, right? Like he's all about talking about the greatness of the empire, even as he pokes fun of it. So he's doing a little bit of both here. I love how Billyfish identifies the oddities of British culture, the parts that are humorous, the idea that you would name dogs, or that you would march into battle left, right, or that you would tip your hat to a woman. These are things that are quirky and weird in this, in the culture here, particularly in Irhab, in this village. Okay, did that. Oops, let me go beyond. Okay, so the next part I want to get into is this Western way of war. We're going to start it with Utah in this village, and then we'll move on to later in the film. So at the Army, U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, we talk about ways of war as a way to help our students frame different approaches to war, that not all societies approach war the same way. There's a particularly Western way. And we use Jeffrey Parker's The Cambridge History of Warfare as one of the texts to help students understand this. And so he kind of captures these 5 big elements. And you'll see several of these elements, I would argue 4 of them in this movie. You see this emphasis on technology and discipline, this idea that, and we'll see this in the scene coming up, where Sean Connery will talk about being a soldier. And I want to differentiate between a soldier and a warrior. They're not the same things. Warriors or fighters fight, and they can be really, really good at it, but soldiers fight through discipline. They take orders. They have regulations. It's about loyalty to a system more so than it's about just fighting battles or in conflict. And that discipline is really important in understanding these different ways, this tribal way of war and this British way of war that come into collision in this movie. There's also this highly aggressive military tradition. We'll also see this. A lot of times tribal battles are bloodless. They're not always bloodless, in fact, not mostly so, but in many cases, blood is not the motive. You don't need to kill people in tribal warfare. The idea is establishing some sort of honor and relative prominence, not necessarily killing everybody. So I want you to listen to that difference as we get into these clips when Sean Connery and Michael Caine are leading this new tribal army that they've trained in a British way against another tribal army. And we'll see that they are innovating. Everything they bring is an innovation. We don't see the unique system of finance because they're just there to rip everything off. But one of the things I would suggest, Jeffrey Parker doesn't bring this up, but it's important to understand why Europe developed this peculiar emphasis on discipline and technology. Other places also tried to do technology as well, but Europe was peculiar in that, and part of the reason I would argue is because Europe went through a demographic collapse from the 1300s to the 1600s because of the plague that came back over and over and over again, and every time it came back killed anywhere from 25 to 75% of a population. So Europe always had to figure out how to fight with less. So they had to have quality over quantity. They couldn't just rely on manpower to solve their problems. And I think that's an important distinction. Okay, so let's observe how this competing way of war is addressed. And the first way we'll see that it's addressed is in this discussion with Uta.
That we are heaven sent to deliver you from your enemies.
आसमान से नज़ल हुए हैं ताकि तुम्हारे दुश्मन
Now listen to this discussion about enemies.
Enemy is all around. The Bashkai are the worst.
So the Bashkai will describe their enemies the same way as Uta is.
All down comes out and pisses downstream when we go bathing.
Shocking.
They're always stealing our women, putting on masks. And so our hub chappies thinking them devils and running like the bloody hell away.
War.
Young.
Red war will give him.
Okay, so it's red war. Now here's Uta's response.
He says he give you 2 goats for each Bashkai man you're killing.
So it's a transactional aspect of war in the tribal dynamic.
1 goat for each woman and child.
A handsome offer. But rather than knocking them over one at a time, we'd like to do the whole thing in one fell swoop. Serve him up a proper victory. Storm Bashkai, take the city.
एक दांव में सारे कसर Bashkai को लेना चाहते हैं.
Shihan?
He says, how much for all that?
Only the honor of leading the brave men of Erheb into battle.
Okay, so here they are.
Bashkai is only the beginning. We hope to go on from victory to victory until he runs out of enemies.
फतेह पे फतेह दिलवाना चाहते हैं.
And a monarch of all you submit.
Bashkai सिर्फ शुरुआत है. फतेह पे फतेह दिलवानी.
So the idea is to conquer everything.
All he surveys.
From the highest place in the valley.
من قمة جبل.
Okay, so now.
And take him in token of our earnest.
And now the women of Arab will cut his bollocks off.
So they understand that it's going to be a transactional part. So they still play a transactional role.
We're going to teach you soldiering, the world's noblest profession. When we've done with you, you'll be able to stand up and slaughter your enemies like civilized men. But first, you'll have to learn to march in step, do the manual of arms, without even having to think. Good soldiers don't think. They just obey. Do you suppose if a man thought twice, he'd give his life for queen and country? Not bloody likely. He wouldn't go near the battlefield.
Okay, so that aspect of, let me pause this for a second. Okay, that aspect that you go into battle, once again, remember what Billyfish said, marching left, right, left, right. That's what he's telling them, that you have to learn to be a soldier. You have to learn the manual of arms. You got to learn how to march. Now, it's funny, when I sent out on LinkedIn that I was giving this presentation, I got a bunch of people who commented on this movie. Some who said that it's the best special forces movie ever made. Some people that commented that they had seen or had this experience in Afghanistan themselves, this aspect that the American army was going to teach the manual of arms to the Afghan army, like you have to learn that to be good fighters. Now, you might have to learn that to be good soldiers, but the Taliban, for example, they don't want to be good soldiers. They just want to be good fighters. And I think that it's a fascinating distinction that Danny gives us in that little clip there. Okay, now they're marching off to war to go to Bakshai, and or Bashkai and fight this battle. And you're going to see Danny and Peachy set up their lines, and then you're going to see what the men of Bashkai do. So they march into battle, form a line, and the men of Bashkai, they just come pouring out of the fortress willy-nilly. And you'll hear their commands here.
Billyfish. Blood is what we want. The bloodier the better. See that it is so.
So it shall be, Huzoor. Auditorium.
Okay, so bloody is what we want, and the bloodier the better.
Straight line here.
That's part of that highly aggressive military tradition that Jeffrey Parker includes. And here they are lining up, and here these guys are dancing around because they're demonstrating their bravery in the face of the enemy, which is what they're supposed to do. And here Utta's kind of scared, but then he'll be overwhelmed by the Western-style violence that gets depicted because it doesn't seem very honorable how they're fighting. You know, where's the honor of killing men at that distance sort of thing? So now they're going to march in, and they're going to close with the enemy. We'll talk about the significance here, but Danny's going to get shot in the chest with an arrow, and there's going to be a significant aspect. But you hear, once again, remember Billyfish's description, march into battle, left, right, left, right. And here Utta is kind of amazed by it. But the fascinating thing is after they win, Utta wants to cut people's heads off.
No more groveling. We ain't going to put your city to the torch. Nor hang you in chains, nor rape your daughters.
He actually said, we're not going to put your city to the torch.
Let the men of Erheb and the men of Bashkai be as brothers. Brothers in arms. Let them march together under one banner and share alike in the victories to come.
I'd say, as Bashkai or Arab, hi, brother.
Have the Bashkai any enemies to speak of?
आप लोग पे दुश्मन है बादशाह के? Oh, enemies all around. The Pardoks, the Gandharas, the Shus, the Khabaks. The Pardoks people coming out and pissing downstream on Bashkai people when they go bathing.
Shock it.
We'll strike them down and grind them into dust.
Okay, so that's the idea. Strike them down and grind them into dust. And here, of course...
Took more villages.
Oh.
Our ranks swelled. They were well trained and disciplined, but with Danny at their head, Sikander II, they were also inspired.
Okay, so Danny gets shot in the chest in that big battle. And because he's wearing a form of body armor, the arrow just sticks there. And he pulls the arrow out, and he lives, and there's no blood. And all of these... I can't think of the right word. But anyway, traditional folks think that this is godlike, that Danny is a god. So he said he was going to make himself an idol. He becomes an idol. And so Peachy recommends that he uses it. What's fascinating is Billyfish, though he understands the British, he still doesn't understand it. Like he actually thinks maybe Billy is a god. So it's fascinating that Billyfish is this great mediator, but he doesn't really get either side fully well. He doesn't fully understand the people of Kafiristan, nor does he fully understand the British. But he can be this mediator between. Okay. So another powerful message in this whole sequence is the power of faith. So the center picture here is Danny, pulling the arrow out of his chest. The upper picture takes place a few minutes before the battle actually commences. So the battle, they're all lined up, they're ready to fight, and then these guys come walking through, and the young boy in front is ringing a bell because all these men have their eyes closed. These are holy men from the city of Secundar Gul. And they're holy men, and the reason they have their eyes closed is they're not supposed to look on anything evil. And so the boy's ringing the bell so they can just follow him. And everybody on both armies immediately drops to the ground on their stomachs and closes their eyes because they can't look on these holy men because they're so holy. This is the significance of religion. And of course, the picture on the bottom is Danny. After he's pulled it out, all the guys drop to the ground because they now think he's that holy. He's a god, and they're now worshiping him. Eventually, Danny and Peachy will go to Secundar Gul because that's where all the money's being taken, and they think that they need to get the money. And so what they do is they get taken there, and Danny is immediately taken by the priests, and they want to kill him because they think he's impersonating God. And he needs to be, that's blasphemy, and they need to kill him. But when they rip his shirt off, it realizes that he's got this Masonic symbol there, and then they reveal that at Secundar Gul, there's also this Masonic symbol, which is the picture on the right, supposedly left there by Alexander, which is why it's called Secundar, because they've taken Alexander and they call it Secundar. And they call Danny Secundar II, or the son of Secundar, meaning he's the son of Alexander, come back to govern the people. So Danny twists this aspect of faith. Okay, so here's a couple things. I'm not going to go over all of them, but why I think this film matters. It's sort of a great poetic one. One is you see the problems of hubris. Can you act like you're God and survive what follows? This is a great film about this. There is no way to do this without mediation. If you don't have Billyfish, they completely fail. They have a line in here, I didn't show the scene, but where Danny and Peachy say to each other, different countries, different customs, mustn't be prejudiced. Great lesson all by itself. And every culture has its way of war. I will give this point here, this idea of art transcending the artist. Rudyard Kipling uses this hymn in his book. John Huston has this hymn in the movie. Right at the end, Sean Connery will actually sing this, and Michael Caine will join in with him. And what I love about this hymn is obviously a very Christian hymn, but it also has meaning for the film itself, because the Son of God in this case is Danny Dravit. The martyr is Peachy Carnahan, a glorious band that of course refers to Jesus' disciples, but that disciple is Billyfish. And then the noble army are the fighters of Kafiristan. Now, one of the things I would offer is going all the way to the present. I'll let you guys read this because you can pause this video later on and come back and read this whole thing. But this is a quote from Douglas Lute, who worked on the National Security Council to manage the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq for the White House. And he did so for several years. And this is in an interview with the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. And he identifies just how ignorant we were going into Afghanistan. Just as ignorant as Danny and Billy are in the movie, at the time of the movie. Like, we think that we can change everything just as well. And I'm going to actually pause on this because I've gone over time. But one of the things I appreciate is this film offers so much for us to help understand and appreciate how different cultures function and the need to have somebody to explain to us. And even when we have a mediator like a Billyfish, that doesn't mean we always understand what's happening. I hope you watch the film. I hope you enjoy it. And I'd be fascinated if you reach out and talk to me about it. And I'm interested for your questions.
Thanks so much, Brian. We do have a few audience questions here. This film was released more than 46 years ago. Do you think John Huston would have depicted Afghanistan of the late 19th century any differently today? In other words, have historical perspectives changed over the course of nearly half a century? Okay, well, the answer to that is yes.
But I think what I like is I think John Huston presented it more as Rudyard Kipling saw it, and I don't think today we would present it that way. I like the fact that he gives us the jingoism and the veiled and sometimes unveiled racism, because that was how people thought in the late 19th century. And you get that unvarnished. And I think to a degree, as you watch this movie today, you recognize that when Danny Dravitz says, bringing enlightenment to the earth, that there's a certain amount of, I don't know, maybe he's not saying it that sarcastically, but I think John Huston intends a little sarcasm at that time, and I certainly think we could take it with a whole lot more sarcasm today, that isn't what they were really doing, even though that is what they thought they were doing.
Can you speak a little further to the depiction of Freemasonry?
No, I cannot. So I'm not even going to touch that. In this film, I'm vaguely aware of aspects of Freemasonry, but one of the things I would say in this film is they present it very respectfully. And it's done in the sense that there's a brotherhood, a sort of universal brotherhood of man. And in this sense, they're going that it dates all the way back, obviously, to the days of Alexander the Great. So that's how the film presents it. Whether that is truly how a Mason would see it, I'll leave that up to a Mason to explain.
How far-fetched was Kipling's tale? Is there any basis in historical fact?
Well, he has, there are certain, and I tried to identify a few of the notes on sort of the notes in the film clips. He does reference things that were historically accurate. In some cases, the film itself represents a Colonel Robertson, when there was later a medical officer, Robertson, who does go to Kafiristan. And they do reference a geographer's party, and there was a geographer's party who went there, even if they don't use the actual names of the party individuals. So there are certain aspects that are true. I don't believe, and I would rather doubt, that there were two British sergeants who went there and tried to rob Kefirstan 3 ways from Sunday, or 4 ways from Sunday. And I'm pretty sure also that there wasn't a massive trove of jewels and gold from Alexander's days. So I think those parts are probably less accurate.
It is common today for filmmakers to bring in a consultant or consultants to kind of ensure authenticity in depicting other cultures. Do you have any idea if language, customs, do you have any idea if Huston did that?
Well, it's interesting. In a way, Huston, mostly he didn't. I think by today's standards, I think he avoided that. So he was telling Kipling's tale more than he was trying to tell it culturally accurately. So that was a thing that I think would be different between maybe a director today and then. But to his credit, he's pretty faithful to Kipling's depiction. And Kipling, to his credit, kind of did understand the culture. So there are aspects that I think he got right because Kipling got it right. Because Kipling respected Indian and Afghan culture significantly, and he's not just writing as a Brits are awesome and everybody else stinks and they're all ignorant. One of the things I would say is we are all ignorant. So when they call certain people ignorant, that's not untrue, because there's certainly things that all of us are ignorant about. So often we hear that word worse than it was intended. But I don't think he was going for cultural authenticity as much as he was literary authenticity.
You mentioned the hubris. Is there any other resonance in this film to today, cultural, political, in the storyline, in any other way?
Well, I think, so the points I bring up to students are the points I brought up at the end. The importance of recognizing that if you're going to operate in a foreign culture, you need to have a mediator, somebody that can help you, that can help translate for you, not just words, but what things mean and what the significance are. So when the holy men walk in front, Peachy Carnahan goes over to Billyfish and asks him, who are these guys and what's going on? And Billyfish, even though Billyfish is laying on the ground and himself shading his eyes and he won't look at them, so Billyfish is sort of half and half. He's a little bit of this and he's a little bit of that. And ideally, that's what you need, is you need somebody who can do those roles. And I would say, unfortunately, we don't do that well enough. That would be my single biggest lesson. I would argue that the other great lesson about this film is understanding that, as they discuss, that not everybody is the same and it's okay to be different. So that simple line, and it's kind of almost said as a throwaway line, but that different countries, different customs, or different cultures, and we mustn't be prejudiced, that is a profound line all by itself.
And I suspect you can underscore all of this with your personal experience in the Middle East.
Yeah, absolutely. I ended up writing a book. It's on this list, Bees and Spiders. So the whole idea was trying to articulate different cultures. In this case, American culture were bees and Arab culture was spiders, meaning that Arab culture was much more focused on social connections and American culture much more focused on how you get tasks done. And the idea was just trying to explain, hey, here's why we often run at cross purposes and we're saying we want something done and they don't even understand why we're saying it and it doesn't make sense. Much as you see the whole explanation of soldiering and why the average guy would not even, the average Kafiri would not even understand why that is necessary. Why do you have to march to go into battle, for example?
Well, Brian, thank you so much. This is fascinating. I think it's a terrific start to what's going to be a terrific series, Hollywood versus history. We invite you all to keep an eye on kclibrary.org and for our next installment with the Command and General Staff College. We thank you. We thank the Command and General Staff College. We also thank once more the Jerry Rosenblum Trust for their great generosity in making tonight's program and making this series possible. Everyone, have a good evening. Thanks for joining us.